If I told you that Melbourne apartments are forecast to grow faster than houses in 2026, you'd probably think I've lost it. Everyone knows the rule: land appreciates, buildings depreciate. Always buy houses, right? Well, KPMG's latest forecast tells a different story. They're projecting Melbourne unit prices to grow 7.1% in 2026, compared to 6.6% for houses. That's not a rounding error. Units are expected to outpace houses by half a percentage point. And the January 2026 update confirmed this, with units forecast at 7.3% versus houses at 6.8%. Today, I'm going to break down exactly why this is happening, whether it changes the fundamentals of how you should invest, and the specific types of units that are worth your attention versus the ones that are still a trap. Let's get into it. Let's start with the raw numbers. KPMG's residential property market outlook. This is one of the big four accounting firms, not some random blog. Projects Melbourne house prices to grow 6.8% and unit prices to grow 7.3% in 2026. This would add roughly $65,000 to a median house and $43,000 to a median unit. Now, this isn't just a Melbourne thing. Nationally, KPMG expects unit prices to outpace houses across the board. 5.1% growth for units versus 4.5% for houses in 2026. KPMG economist Brendan Ryan said affordability pressures are driving buyer demand towards attached dwellings, with units and townhouses offering more accessible entry points in increasingly expensive capital city markets. But Melbourne is where that gap is the widest, and there are structural reasons for that. Melbourne's median house price sits around 1.01 million. The median unit price is about $635,000. That's a gap of over $350,000, or roughly 34% less for a unit. For a first home buyer or an investor working within borrowing capacity limits, that gap is the entire difference between being able to enter the market or not. And this is happening at a time when the expanded 5% deposit scheme has price caps that sit close to median house prices. So there's a wave of government-supported first-home buyers who are being funneled toward the unit market almost by design. KPMG specifically flagged this. The entry-level segment is set to outperform, supported by the deposit scheme and price caps that cluster buyers around certain price points. So there are three forces converging to drive Melbourne's unit market in 2026. Let me walk you through each one. Number one, the affordability squeeze. This is the big one. Melbourne house prices have effectively priced out a huge segment of the buyer pool. When you factor in a cash rate of 3.6%, well, now 4.1% at the time of this recording, and APRA's serviceability buffer, the average household simply cannot borrow enough to buy a median price house in many established suburbs. So what happens? Buyers don't leave the market, they adjust what they're buying. A couple that can't afford a $950,000 house in Coburg can afford a $650,000 apartment or townhouse in the same suburb. They still want the location, the lifestyle, the train station. They just accept a different property type to get it. This is what KPMG calls the affordability rotation. Demand shifting from houses to quality attached dwellings. And because this isn't driven by speculation, but by genuine structural constraint, it's a sustainable trend, not a bubble. Force 2, tightening supply. Here's a number that should get your attention. CBRE estimates that Melbourne apartment delivery will average around 9,000 apartments per year through to 2030. That's nearly 25% below Sydney's delivery rate. Meanwhile, demand for housing stock in Melbourne is expected to average 38,000 units per annum over the next 5 years. That's a massive undersupply. Construction costs are elevated, labor shortages persist, and new building approvals are stuck near decade low levels. KPMG forecasts only about 160,000 new dwellings nationally per year, 30% below the National Housing Accord target of 240,000. What does this mean? The existing stock of well-located units is becoming more valuable because it's not being easily replaced. If a developer can't feasibly build a new apartment block because construction costs are too high, the existing apartments in that area benefit from reduced competition. Force 3, the rental market squeeze. Melbourne's vacancy rates sit around 1.1% 0.1% to 1.4%. That's historically tight. And CBRE expects the citywide vacancy rate to drop even further, from 2.1% down to 1.4% by 2030 as population growth outpaces new supply. For unit investors, this translates directly to rental income stability and growth. Domain expects Melbourne rents to rise gradually through 2026, with unit rents expected to grow slightly faster than house rents across most capital cities. The reason? Affordability pressures are pushing more and more people into the rental market for longer, and many of those renters are competing for units in well-located suburbs. CBRE projects median apartment rents nationally could grow by 24% between 2025 and 2030. Even if Melbourne were to capture a fraction of that, the rental income trajectory for well-located units is strong. Now, this is where I need to pump the brakes, because the worst thing you could take from this video is units are going to outperform, so I'll buy any apartment in Melbourne. That would be a disaster. The unit market in Melbourne is sharply divided between good investments and terrible ones, and the line between them is very clear. What to avoid: high-rise, investor-grade apartments in oversupplied pockets, South Bank, Docklands, parts of the CBD. These buildings have hundreds of identical apartments, high strata fees, and a buyer pool that's almost entirely investors. When every unit in a building is an investment property, you're competing on price with your own neighbors. There's no owner-occupier premium, and the data backs this up. Bamboo Roots analysis shows these precincts are expected to underperform the broader unit market, specifically because of oversupply and elevated ongoing costs. What to buy instead, and this is key, is low-rise, scarce unit stock in established suburbs. I'm talking villa units, Art Deco apartments, boutique low-rise blocks of maybe 8 to 12 units max, and with well-designed townhouses in suburbs with strong fundamentals. The reasons these work is threefold. Number one, they're scarce. A 1960s villa unit in Bentley East can't be replicated. When they're gone, they're gone. 2, they attract owner-occupiers as well as investors, which creates competitive tension at sale time. 3, they often sit on larger land components relative to high-rise, which means you're capturing some of that land value appreciation. Townhouses are particularly interesting right now. Bamboo Roots data shows that townhouses are currently outperforming other property types in Melbourne because they sit at that sweet spot between apartment affordability and house-like living space. They typically offer multiple bedrooms, a small garden, and a lock-up garage, which is exactly what young families and downsizers want. So, if you're convinced by the unit story, where specifically should you look? Here are the suburbs I think have the strongest fundamental growth in 2026. The inner north, Brunswick, Coburg, and Preston. Strong rental demand from professionals and students, excellent transport, and a diverse range of unit stock from period conversions to modern townhouses. These suburbs have high walk scores and strong cafe cultures that attract quality tenants. The southeast middle ring, Bentley East, Clayton, and Carnegie. Family-oriented suburbs with excellent school zones, strong Monash University proximity, and scarce villa unit stock. These areas appeal to both investors and owner-occupiers. The inner west, Yarraville, Footscray, and Seddon. Gentrification is well advanced with strong lifestyle appeal and improving transport. Unit buyers here are often priced out house buyers who still want the neighborhood, and that's a powerful demand driver. And Box Hill and surrounds. Strong international buyer interest, proximity to hospitals, Deakin and Box Hill TAFE, and the upcoming suburban rail loop station. The unit market here benefits from both domestic and international demand. Now let me be straight with you. Does this mean you should abandon houses and go all in on units? No. The long-term historical data still shows that houses outperform units over extended periods because of the land component. A house on 600 square meters of land in a good suburb will almost always beat an apartment over a 15 to 20 year period. That fundamental hasn't changed. But what has changed is the short to medium term equation. For the next 2 to 3 years, the affordability crunch, the supply constraints, and the policy settings are creating a window where well-chosen units in the right suburbs could deliver returns that match or beat houses, especially when you factor in the lower entry price and better rental yields. So the practical takeaway is this. If you can afford to buy a quality house in a good Melbourne suburb, that's still likely the best long-term play. But if your budget caps out at about $700,000, don't Don't force yourself into a cheap house in a poor location just to tick the land box. A well-located, scarce unit in an established suburb is a far better investment than a house and land package on the urban fringes. To wrap up, KPMG is forecasting Melbourne units to grow 7.1 to 7.3% in 2026, outpacing houses. This is being driven by the affordability squeeze pushing buyers into attached dwellings, tightening supply as construction lags behind demand, and a rental market that's supporting strong yields. But the critical distinction is between scarce, well-located unit stock, villa units, townhouses, low-rise apartments in established suburbs, and oversupplied, high-rise, investor-grade stock in South Bank and Docklands. The former could deliver excellent returns, the latter is a trap. If you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button. I'm putting out data-driven Melbourne property analysis every week, and if you're serious about investing in this market, you'll want to be across it. Drop a comment below if you've got questions about specific suburbs. I read every single one. See you in the next video.